for everyone in a link so that you can access the slides as well. And just have to get here. So the video will be on our DEM YouTube channel, and then we'll include links there as well as on some emails and other sites with access to the slides. So you can review this, and those who weren't able to make the meeting today can also watch it at a later date. And one more, they don't make scrolling through everyone easy here. Okay. So we have, everyone has access. So a little bit of an overview of today. The agenda is we're going to do an overview of the new BRIC program. So BRIC is the Building Resilient Infrastructures and Communities program, which is basically just the new version of what was formerly known as the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program. And then we'll have a section going over the application. When we did PDM before, the applications were done through the eGrant system, and FEMA has now switched over to what's called FEMA Go. So it's very similar to the eGrants, but it's just a new system with a few changes to the application and the methods of entering the information. We're going to go over the review process and for what we at the state have to do and what FEMA is going to do when they review your applications and decide on awards. And then we have some BCA expert partners who are on to give a short overview of what will need to be in your BCA to help you make the decision about, the best person at your agency, or if you need to hire someone to do the BCA. We'll get started with our overview here. Oops, going through too fast. I always forget there's a delay. So in the process that we have, you are going to, this thing's blocking my screen again. Enter your application into FEMA Go. That also including you get access to FEMA Go, fill out your application. You're also going to be required to include the BCA. So the BCA score, the benefit cost analysis score, has to be at least 1 or higher. We'll go into that in more detail later. But you're not only going to include the score in the application, you also need to make sure to include and attach the actual BCA paperwork. FEMA doesn't just look at the number, but they actually go through and review the BCA completely, including all the math and formulas that went into it. We do a state review. So after you submit your application, we'll review it. We'll send it back to you to make some changes and do some clarifications. Then we score and rank them, and then we submit it to FEMA, and then they do a national review. That takes a couple of months. They'll do an RFI and some follow-up questions with you as well, and then you'll get the award. And then, of course, after that, if you see the other mountains in the background, there's a lot that goes into not just getting the award, but managing the grant after it comes in. So you'll have quarterly reports, reimbursement requests, meeting all the deadlines for that. So just it's a lot of work, and with the change to BRIC, there are a lot of changes. Normally, we have anywhere from 15 to 30 NOIs. This year, we've received over 105. So there's a lot more interest this year. There's a lot more to go through, and FEMA has put some additional restrictions, categories, limits on things. And so we'll go into that as we go through this process. But there's a lot of changes for us, there's a lot of changes for you, and there's a lot of changes for FEMA. And it's an ongoing learning process. Since this is the first year BRIC's going in, we've seen the guidance, but it's not clear in all areas, and there are some things that FEMA is still figuring out and still implementing. So you'll probably get continued updates throughout the application process, and then hopefully after this year's applications are reviewed and awarded, we'll have more knowledge and more information going forward. So starting next year onward, it'll be a much smoother process with more clear information and clear guidelines. But just an overview, as I mentioned, of the whole process. The application period opened September 30th, I believe is the date they did. So basically the beginning of October. Your application due to the state, you'll turn that into us. That deadline is set as December 1st. The application period, us, the state, to have all of your sub-applications and all of our rankings and our other grants into FEMA as a complete package is the end of January. But there's a lot of work you get the final application package submitted to FEMA. FEMA will then do a notice of selection. The grants that were considered eligible and are being considered for further review will then receive what's called an RFI, or a request for information from FEMA, asking you to either clarify some things on your application or to do some environmental or historic reviews for your projects before they finalize and approve the award. If you respond to the RFI and you'll then be obligated the grant. FEMA obligates it to the state, gives us the grant award, and we award the grant to you. All the grant management that goes into it, so you'll either do your construction project along with submitting quarterly reports, or do your mitigation plan or your scoping project. Go through that whole process. When the project is complete, you then submit all the finalized closeout paperwork, and then closeout comes to us. We submit that along with our closeout paperwork to FEMA. They'll close the grant. Once the grant is closed, the state and locals are required to retain the records for at least 3 years. At the end of there, it says hope for no audit, but we recommend just hold on to the records as long as you can. It's a minimum of 3 years, but it's always good to have things on hand in case something comes up later, as well as just having paperwork there to help you with any future grants you decide to do. They're a good resource. Priorities for this year under BRIC, they're really prioritizing projects that are public infrastructure, specifically like large public infrastructure projects, projects that mitigate risk to one or more lifelines. We'll go into what those lifelines are a little bit later, but they're basically kind of categories of disaster response and recovery, different factors of that. Projects that incorporate nature-based solutions. So those are things where they're starting to look at more alternative power sources, or improving your flood mitigation by incorporating more natural wetlands or other nature-based things. And then also there's an increase of funding to applicants that adopt the latest building codes. And not just the latest building codes, but if you have building codes or requirements in your community that are above and beyond the basic minimum building code requirements. So uses of the assistance, so total BRIC funding, there's a couple of categories that we can put the projects under, and they have a specific amount. So there's 33.6 million allocated to state and territory allocations, 20 million is a tribal set aside, and the total of competition projects is 446 million. They include, any of those include management costs, your capability and capacity building activities, and the projects as well. So capability and capacity building activities, also your mitigation plans. Our set aside for the state of Utah is 600,000, and that is federal share. So there are some subcategories within that set aside, but we can only submit up to $600,000 worth of projects under that set aside category. So we might get a lot of applications that are over that, but we can only submit up to the 600,000. So part of that is planning and project scoping. I'm going to let Eric jump in a bit and talk about that set aside. Give you a little bit more detail about what that means and what that means for the applicants who are interested in the planning and scoping projects.
Yeah, so FEMA has this thing called the Capability and Capacity Building Activities, C&CB activities. It includes 4 categories: building codes, partnerships, project scoping, and planning. For this year, we only had people submit NOIs for project scoping and planning, none for partnerships or building codes. So the state set aside, only C&CB activities can apply under the state set aside, that 600,000 federal share maximum. So this will include the mitigation plans and the project scoping. So, and because of that, because FEMA requires a community to have a FEMA approved mitigation plan in order to apply for mitigation projects or even project scoping, Utah has given mitigation plans the #1 priority for the state set aside, and the max we can apply for is $300,000 federal share. So of the NOIs, we currently have about around 260,000 federal share for mitigation plans. So that means if you have a project scoping application, NOI, that you would like to apply for a grant for, the maximum that you can apply is around 340,000. FEMA will not go above the 600,000 federal share when they review grants. They will stop at 600,000 and look at no more project scoping grants. So keep that in mind if you have a project scoping application.
Okay, and just to clarify on that, that's for the state as a whole. So that means, you know, there's the 300,000 maximum for planning. That's not just for each plan, that is total. So going forward, starting next year and into future years, we may have to start putting out a schedule for when areas should apply for their plans. In the past, FEMA has always just prioritized plans and awarded them. So some years we've had 5 or 6 planning projects awarded, and other years we've had 1. But since we now can only apply a $300,000 maximum each year, we're going to have to start spreading out those plan applications. So we may be contacting some of you in the future over the next couple of years and letting you know when we, you know, can give you a suggested date for for which year you should apply for your plan, so that we can ensure there's enough funding to go around for all of the plans. Same with project scoping. It's 340,000 maximum that we at the state can submit in our package, which means that if there are more than, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 of you wanting to do project scoping, in general, project scoping tends to be less than that amount, so we could fit a couple of projects in, but we may work back and forth with you, potentially negotiate with some of you to see what amounts we can do to get the most benefit to the most amount of applicants for that.
And can I just clarify that 340,000 is federal share?
Yeah, so that's 75%. So we can submit up to 800,000 with the 75-25 cost share in these planning and project scoping. Oops, going ahead of myself here. So the timeline. This is the timeline for BRIC. In the past, FEMA has, with PDM, they were kind of variable when they would put out their NOFO or the Notice of Funding Opportunity, when the application period and the deadlines were. The last couple of years with PDM, they've stuck to this fall application opening and closing after the first of the year. And as of now, this is going to be FEMA's deadline going forward. So we can plan for next year. These are going to be the same FEMA deadlines. Because of the growth of the program and the complications with so many people being interested, the intense process that can go into creating the applications, wanting to make sure that you have applicable and good BCAs, because often when our projects are not selected for further review, not just in Utah, but nationwide, it's because the BCA was not satisfactory. And also because this application period happens over the holidays and for other reasons. Going forward, we're going to start. Sorry, was someone? I think someone's mic was on. Going forward, starting next year with the state, we're going to try to have a dedicated timeline of when we're going to open NOIs and when we're going to expect applications to be submitted to us, so it's not such a rushed process when FEMA opens up the application period. So look forward for that next year. After this year, we'll start coming out with some dates and deadlines and guidance, hopefully after we've learned more through this year's process. So as we mentioned before, the period opened on September 30th. The sub-application due to the state, so all of you need to have your applications filled out in FEMA Go and submitted to us by December 1st. We at the state then have to review all the applications submitted to us for technical feasibility, for any issues with your budgets or schedules, and then we have to do some, requests for information back and forth with you to help you improve that project. We'll give you a week to, once we send you the information about what needs to be corrected in there, we'll give you a week or so to send that back to us. And then we have to, not just our office, but we review the projects again, making sure all the information was corrected. And then we have a team of people outside of DEM that help us to review, score, and rank the projects. So because we're going to have to submit only a certain number, it can be competitive. It might be competitive at the state level this time, not just at the national level. And then we have to rank them, place them into the grant package application that we submit up to FEMA. We have to have that up hard deadline up to FEMA. Everything has to be submitted and ready to go and received by FEMA by January 29th. Our goal is to have that done earlier in January. It's never good to rush the deadline. So we're going to try to have the reviews back to you for your RFIs, hopefully within a week or two of receiving them in December, so that you have some time to get them back to us. And hopefully next year going forward, we can set this process up a little earlier so that these things won't be happening as close to or over the holidays. Then FEMA will take a few months to review the projects. Part of it being competitive nationally, I think Eric might go into this a bit more later, is while there is over 400 million in available funding, it's there because there's so much interest and because they've raised the project limit from 4 million per project to 50 million per project, FEMA is only going to accept and review up to double the amount. So I can't say number of projects, but FEMA will take out of the rankings that FEMA has and how you meet those ranking scores, which we'll go over in detail later. FEMA is only going to review the best $800 million worth of projects. So we want to get everyone's score up pretty high, and the top 800 million nationwide will be reviewed competitively. And then they'll go over the qualitative aspects of those applications and then choose the top $400 million worth of projects to award. They'll then give notice of which projects they've selected to be awarded and to do the request for further information in the summer of 2021. They were able to get that out for PDM in June of this year, but their timeline for next year says that they'll do it sometime between the summer and fall of 2021. So it could be June or it could be September before they get those requests for information out. After you get the request for information, it's just get that in as quickly as you can, answer FEMA's questions. We'll help you with any environmental reviews you need to do or other issues you need to work on before you can receive the grant award. And then that award will happen anytime between the fall and winter of 2021. So when you're applying this year, expect that you're not going to get the funding at least until the fall or possibly the winter of next year. We also recommend, since it is so competitive this year, there are so many RFIs, and this is kind of a learning process year. If you feel like you've just decided you want to do this project, or it's the timeline is really tight, you have until December to get us your application. You'll have a week or so to respond to our questions and improve it. We recommend anyone, we still have your notice, you can apply next year, and we will work with you from now through next year to help ensure that you have a good quality project for submitting. And then we're going to get into eligibility. So we have kind of 4 things that go into eligibility. The sub-applicant has to be eligible. You have to have a mitigation plan. Your activity has to be an eligible activity. And then just a few other comments. Oops, and I'm going to turn this over. Emma is going to cover this A and B for us.
So we just want to, lay out who an eligible applicant versus sub-applicant is, because it can be kind of confusing in the language. So an eligible applicant is a state, tribe, or territory. So in our case, the applicant is the Utah Department of Public Safety, which is who DEM is under. This is just the way they set it up in FEMA Go. So the applicant will be DPS. An eligible sub-applicant is any state agency, county, city, or town, or special district government who will be submitting an application. So, for example, Salt Lake City or Utah County would both be eligible sub-applicants. Those who are not eligible to apply would be individuals, businesses, or nonprofits. The only way they could apply is if an eligible sub-applicant applied on their behalf. Another part of the eligibility is a mitigation plan. So FEMA is requiring that all sub-applicants have a FEMA-approved mitigation plan. The exception to this would be if you are applying for a mitigation plan grant. We'll go into this in much further detail later, but we just wanted to touch on it now. And as always, the state mitigation plan is under hazards.utah.gov. So if you have not checked that out, please do so.
Okay, now after you've determined you're an eligible applicant, and as Emma was saying, businesses, nonprofits are not eligible to apply as a sub-applicant, but FEMA does look favorably on public-private partnerships and kind of multi-jurisdictional projects. So if you as a city, county, or special district would like to partner with a developer or with a nonprofit and work together on a project, that is something that you can do. And the things that those nonprofits or developers contribute can count towards your cost share for that project. So that's just something to consider as well, is that you can do partnerships, but those specific agencies cannot be the sub-applicant. After you know you're an eligible applicant, it's the eligible activities. So while the process of the grant application and the priorities for what FEMA is looking for changes and develops every year, the eligibility of projects tends to stay the same. It's all under the HMA guidance, so the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Guidance, that and the 44 CFR, which is the federal regulation that FEMA works under for disasters and for mitigation. That's where the eligibility comes from. They did expand some eligibility with the opening of BRIC, and those include the project scoping. Project scoping you might be aware of or be familiar with as advanced assistance. The last 2 years of BRIC, or sorry, the last 2 years of PDM, the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program, FEMA allowed what was called advanced assistance awards, and it was basically, and project scoping is the same, it's an award for you to do some sort of project scoping or research or development. So maybe you have an idea for a project that you would like to do, or you have an issue with one of your public infrastructure systems, but you don't know the best way to address that issue or the best type of project to do to best mitigate it, then you can apply for this project scoping to help you do a study or to do a survey or to investigate different mitigation strategies. The hope of that is that then you'll be able to develop a project and know what type of mitigation activity you need to do. And in another year, you can then apply for an actual project grant. Building code activities is another one. They're helping with funding for improving your building codes or doing activities to improve your building codes. Pre-award costs. Pre-award costs have always been eligible, but FEMA's had a deadline associated with them from when you could start counting them. Previously, it was at the start of the application period, and then last year, I think one year they did it 6 months before, and last year it was expanded to up to 9 months before, because they realized that you guys do a lot of work in creating these applications, in doing your BCAs, and in doing the engineering to have enough to supplement your application. So there's no deadline, there's no date. You can count pre-award activities that happened at any point, but you can only count things that are directly related to the application. So that would be your BCA, any engineering that was specifically done for this grant project, and any management work that you did specifically to create and develop the project application. There are some additional activities that are available under wildfire and wind implementation. It's in the section 1205 of the DRRA. I'll cover that a little bit more later. And then earthquake early warning is something also that's new. Another thing that's come out under last year under the DRA is they now also look at drought activities as well. So things such as groundwater recharge, those type of activities are now considered an eligible item. So some ineligible activities. So these are things that we can tell you straight up if your project meets any of these descriptors, then it is not eligible. One is new construction. So mitigation can help you to mitigate against the risk of existing infrastructure or buildings. So things that were built before current codes, before current standards were in place. It can come in and help you, retrofit seismically, can help you update some other issues for flood proofing, but it's not, new construction is not eligible. So whether that be that you're building a road or building a new building or a new fire station, new construction is not. It's expected that as communities expand and grow and build new things, that they will build those things to code, and that should just be part of the standard building practice. If you have a fire station that was built 30 years ago that you need to retrofit for flooding or earthquake, then that is eligible because you're addressing and mitigating an existing risk. Deferred maintenance or repair, so if that you just need to maintain your infrastructure, repair the roof of a building, do some other activities like clean out rivers that are full of debris, things that would be considered maintenance that you should be maintaining or repairing regularly anyways, those are not eligible activities. Replacement of an existing building or obsolete system, as we said, you can mitigate the risk, you can do some projects to improve the building itself or to reduce the threat of that facility to a disaster, but to tear down and replace an existing building is not eligible. There are fire activities that are now eligible. So fuel breaks are something that are not eligible. So if you label your project as we're building a fuel break, that's a red flag, FEMA will deny it. However, there are some subparts of building a fuel break that are. So if you're doing wildfire, like fuel reduction activities, certain things like mulching or seeding or improving native vegetation and getting rid of invasive species, those type of activities are, but to create and maintain and build a fuel break or to purchase property for a fuel break is not. Preparedness and response with mitigation. Mitigation, as we mentioned, like with the new construction, it's where you're mitigating a threat, an existing threat to an existing structure. So anything that's preparedness or response, so sandbagging, purchasing your normal response equipment, such as fire trucks or police or firefighter equipment, those type of things are not eligible. Also any response activities, so if you're trying to get a grant to repair stuff that happened as the result of a disaster that already happened, those also are not mitigation. Construction, so if you've already started constructing something and you want to get money to finish it, that's not eligible. It has to be, there can be no ground disturbance or issues like that before the project begins. Activities that only address man-made hazards. So some of those would be, man-made hazards might be if you have cars that, you have a road that, cars are flying off of, or things like that, installing things like guardrails or dealing with the threat of, terrorist activities or bombings. Those are not eligible under this program. It's for natural hazards. Landscaping is something else that's not eligible. So when you can implement landscaping into your projects, but landscaping itself is not going to be something you can claim reimbursement for. One thing that I guess is not an exception, but something that can be confusing there is if you're doing revegetation. So as we mentioned with fires, if you're removing invasive species and putting in more resilient species, native species into that project, or if you're doing river restoration and you're doing plantings to help stabilize the soil, that's not considered landscaping. It's an integral part of the kind of natural aspect of utilizing nature-based solutions. So those things would be eligible, but just making a parking strip look nice or, putting in grass or other purposes for visual appeal, those aren't eligible. If it's not a standalone project, so FEMA won't approve projects that are contingent on other activities. So that means if you're trying to pay for one phase of a larger project and you're being able to do your part of that project is dependent on someone else or some other part being done first, FEMA will not approve that. They want to know that the project will be able to be completed and started in the year that it's awarded. Open space acquisition of unimproved land is also not eligible. So you can purchase as part of mitigation. So that would be a kind of a prevention measure. If you wanted to restrict building in, the floodway or the floodplain, or you knew that there was an issue with a potential for landslide in an area, if that area is not developed already, you have other options such as putting in stricter codes, putting in some regulations, preventing building there, or purchasing the land on your own. So they're not eligible under that respect, but if you have, as we mentioned, along with new construction, things that were developed before that risk was known, or the floodway or the landslide has developed after those properties were already developed, you can acquire the property and remove the homes or the structures that are there and return it to unimproved or open space. And then the removal of brush and debris. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but that's similar to maintenance. You can improve a riverway. You can go in and remove invasive species that are growing there, redirect the channel to make it more natural. There's a lot of river restoration projects that we've done, but you can apply to just remove the buildup of debris in the river. There has to be some actual stream bed restoration and improvement that happens. And then just a few other things to note. For eligibility, you can't duplicate activities that another federal agency has a more specific authority over, such as, if you are working on something that maybe UDOT or NRCS or someone else, they provide funding. So, working on roads or doing improvements in culverts that are managed, maintained, and funded by other federal highways, that's their purview and their authority to do that. So that's not something that we can apply or pay for. FEMA doesn't approve those activities. Your project must be cost effective and technically feasible. That's where the cost effective, your BCA comes in, having a good solid BCA and then explaining how it's technically feasible for you to do what you're wanting to do. And you must follow the environmental and historic preservation laws. So if you're going to be doing any sort of work where you're disturbing land or working in stream beds or rivers, you're going to have to do some historic and cultural surveys, as well as some environmental surveys if there are any endangered species in that area, and comply by those guidelines. All right, I'm now going to switch it over to Eric to go over the application.
Okay, we're going to talk about the FEMA Go application now. Hopefully everyone has already seen these instructions that were sent out to everyone that submitted an NOI to getting started in FEMA Go. So this is pretty critical that if you have not done so, that you do this as soon as you can. You need to go to the FEMA Go website and create an account there and enter your jurisdiction's DUNS number. And then it will list this eBiz POC point of contact. It's the person who registered your jurisdiction at sam.gov. That person then needs to go and create their own account in FEMA Go and then assign you the authorized organization representative role and then give you access to the mitigation programs. Once you have done that, then you need to email me your jurisdiction's DUNS number, and then I will go in and add your jurisdiction under the Utah Department of Public Safety and give you access to the BRIC program. So hopefully, if you have not done that, please do that as soon as you can. Otherwise, you will not be able to fill out an application. Oops. Okay. So this is what it looks like, FEMA Go right there. And if you click on, you get logged in, and then on the right side of the screen, it'll say apply for new grant. And apparently this was a bug in FEMA's system. You can see the fiscal year 2020, and then it has the BRIC application. Apparently some sub-applicants have been able to see that. If you do see that, do not click on start application. That is only for Utah DEM to do. You would click on the mitigation hazard sub-application, start sub-application. That is where you will click to begin your application. All right, once you are in there, you will see this this screen here with a few pull-down menus. The organization you are applying for is your own entity. And then the organization you are applying to, it'll say Public Safety, comma, Utah Department of, and then it'll give the DUNS number of DPS. You will choose that as you are the sub-applicant and Utah Department of Public Safety is the applicant. And we submit one grant to FEMA as an applicant with attached of multiple sub-applicants and their sub-applications under that one grant. We'll go into the title in a little bit, and then the sub-application type. So there are 4 categories to choose from: plan, project, project scoping, and technical assistance. So no one applied for a technical assistance NOI this year, so I won't go into the details of that. It is on the NOFO if you're interested, or we can talk about it. So you'll choose either a plan, project, or project scoping, and that'll determine the path that FEMA Go will take you. All right, so the sub-application title is actually really important. If you are doing a plan, put your community name plus mitigation plan, and if it's update, add the word update at the end. So like Salt Lake City mitigation plan update or something like that. If you are a project, you want to put community or location specific things plus the specific activity. So like example, like Bountiful City, you could do EOC generator, or Murray retention ponds. The reason why to do this is this will go on a national level. So having a community or location specific thing says, okay, this is where this project is located, and then the specific activity, rather than just saying something like flood risk improvement project. We have no idea what that means from the title, and it's really hard to discern it without getting in. So having something where it can be readily discerned by location and the specific activity really helps on the national and on the state level. If you're doing a project scoping grant, you must include project scoping in the title. So that way you can do Logan City project scoping, and then if it was like a flood, you could say flood project scoping, something like that, or the specific thing if you know what you're looking for. So do not use long or vague non-descriptive titles. Just a quick reminder about project scoping to make sure that your project scoping thing is eligible. So this is to help you develop a future complete application that you just don't know what your project is, or you don't know what one to select to update. So these include engineering, hydrologic and hydraulic studies, collecting data for the BCA, the benefit cost analysis, things like that. All right, so this is really important for your application. Mitigation plan. So you must have a FEMA approved mitigation plan. You must have it, this is a new requirement, you must not only have it at the time of application, so by January 29th of 2021, but also at the time of award. So if you remember, we talked about the timeline. So FEMA has said on their guidance that they think the notice of selection may not even come out until about the fall. Last year, PDM 19 had come out in about the summertime. So if they're early, but think about fall to winter. And if you get awarded, whether winter or if it's delayed in the spring, you would need a FEMA approved mitigation plan by that date. And I'll go over each one in a next slide. But the application will ask the name of either the state or the local. So if you're a state agency, you will fall under the state mitigation plan. If you're a local agency or entity, you will use the local mitigation plan in your area that you approved. So for plan type, you would choose state multi-hazard mitigation plan, and then you choose standard if you are a state agency. We do not have an enhanced plan in Utah. And if you're local, you will choose of the categories local, multi-jurisdictional, multi-hazard mitigation plan. There's another category just called local multi-hazard plan, and there are only I think 1 or 2 of those. And multi-jurisdictional is if it's only like a single city, but the county plans include multiple cities, so they're all multi-jurisdictional. And then the critical thing is you're going to have to link your proposed mitigation activity to the mitigation plan that is relevant to you, and we'll talk about that. So here's a list of essentially most of the applicable mitigation plans in the state of Utah. And if you can see, if you are in one of the red categories, that plan is currently expired. However, both of those plans are currently in FEMA review right now. And if everything goes well, they should be able to get approved pending status in the next couple months. If that happens, your jurisdiction will need to adopt the plan before January 29th and submit the adoption resolution to FEMA, or you will be ineligible to apply for BRIC. So if you are in one of those, just make sure you talk to your local emergency manager and make sure that gets taken care of. If you are in the orange categories, so Castle Valley, Davis, Morgan, Tooele, or Weber counties, those plans are expiring soon. And if you look at the dates, so the approval date is there, they last for 5 years. So if you add 5 years from that date, you can see some of them will expire next November or September, or in Weber County in April of next year. So the concern will be is they are currently updating. So if they update ahead of schedule or on time, you would need to have it approved by an award date. So if it's fall or next winter, it could be pretty close. So if you're in those counties, I would make sure that things get on time and that you will have a FEMA approved plan by the time of award. So those orange ones needs to be by time of award. All right, so in the application, you're going to see this thing, category section called Mitigation Plan, and is the entity that will benefit from the proposed activity covered by it, and you click yes or no. Now, since FEMA, this is a brand new software, FEMA essentially forgot to add a question on their new application. So what I've been instructed is this option for comments here. It says, please provide any additional comments below. You will need to add how your project or your project scoping, how it relates to your local mitigation plan. So I'll show you in the next slide, but even though this says optional, you will need to add it here. So just be aware for those, those who want to, have really good applications and fulfill what FEMA is looking for, you will need to put in this space here, and we will put this out on a sort of a flyer that we're going to send out, a little document with some help for the application. This is in there to remind you to add that right in that section, and I'll show you in a little bit how to do that. So now in the next section will be the scope of work. So this is where essentially the meat, where you're going to tell the story of your application, your project. So the 3 paths, you'll have mitigation plan, project scoping, and project. These activity types have replaced activity codes in the previous grant cycle. So if you are doing a mitigation plan, the first option you would choose between new plan, plan update, planning related activities, or partnerships. No one applied for partnerships. So of the ones, if you are a county, it'll be a plan update. There are no new county plans. They've been going since 2004, and they were all plan updates. A new plan is if you've never done a mitigation plan before, and this is a brand new plan, or if it would be if you were part of like a county plan and you wanted to do like your own city plan, it would be like, that would be considered a new plan because it's a new plan, a mitigation plan. Then you'll choose here these options that I explained earlier. Either the state, if you're a state agency, the state multi-hazard mitigation plan, that would only be for if Utah was doing that. The local one, you'll go down to that local multi-jurisdictional multi-hazard mitigation plan. If you are like a county doing ones with multiple jurisdictions. If you're a city and you're doing it only for your city, then you'll click on the local multi-hazard mitigation plan if it's only one jurisdiction. For project scoping, you can see the 5 categories plus other, and you'll click on the appropriate one in the project, and rather than, it was like almost 90 codes last time, you'll pick from just these few codes here that hopefully will relate to your project. If not, there's other, and you'll have to provide comments to pick your activity type. All right, the scope of work section will also have you choose community lifelines. We'll talk a little bit more about them later as well. But as you can see, there's 7 community lifelines, and essentially FEMA's taken the country and broken it up into different sections called lifelines. And each lifeline has multiple categories underneath. And so these are important that FEMA would really wants to mitigate projects that address at least one, and you get more points if you address more lifelines. So, and there's a document here, this mitigation portfolio will show examples of mitigation projects that link to the community lifelines. And you'll just click on, which one, if you feel like yours addresses energy or communications or transportation somehow, you would click on that as your primary one. And if you wanted to go above and beyond, you could definitely include a separate document that sort of highlights a little bit more how your project addresses one of these community lifelines. And I do not believe this is part, if you're doing a project mitigation plan, you will not be required to do this section because mitigation plans won't apply here. Okay, scope of work continued. So this is where you're going to describe your project, and this will or your plan, but not everything will be here for all 3 of those paths. But depending on if you pick plan, project scoping, or project, it'll determine which questions you get. And each of you should have been emailed a paper copy of the application so you can see the exact questions. But one of those is provide a clear and detailed description of your activity. So I highly recommend that your first sentence clearly and succinctly describes the overall project. I've said this for years in past PDM projects. So what you're going to want to do is you want to give state reviewers and FEMA the very first sentence to a good idea of what the project actually is. So if you're going to build debris basins, the first project is to say, like, St. George, Utah is going to build 2 debris basins at this location. And then after you say that initial statement, then you can go into detail and things like that. That will help from the very beginning when we review at the state. Okay, we know what this project is at the very beginning, and then now we're going to get the detail. And then when FEMA does it, it will help FEMA immensely. And then other questions for like a project type thing is, how will that activity be implemented? There needs to be a nice balance here. So you will need to provide enough detail to tell your story adequately and to link those to the lifelines as well as future the criteria for scoring, which we will get into later. You're going to want to make sure you include things that will address those criteria, but do not be so specific that you get yourself into trouble. So, for example, we've had some seismic projects, seismic retrofitting. You do not want to go into detail and say, we're going to use, this type of brace, these nails, these bolts, things like that, but you could be specific enough to say we're going to do, you know, wall to roof seismic retrofitting, or securing the foundation, things like that, you know, specific enough, but so not too vague, not too specific. Population affected, this will be also affect one of the criteria. So you're going to talk about how, you know, what population does your project affect, and how is the project technically feasible? When will the activity take place? So do not give exact or specific dates, because we don't know when the project will be awarded. And so you can give, you know, general things like, hopefully if you have to do the work in good weather, you can say like from spring to fall time frame, it might take, you know, this long, things like that. And we'll get into the schedule a little bit later. And then an important piece is other alternatives considered. So you need to show FEMA that you looked at other alternatives, and this will not apply for mitigation plans or project scoping grants, that, you know, we thought about this, and include do nothing. So if we did nothing happen, this is why this is the best alternative. You know, instead of, you know, you'll need to come up with some alternatives and tell FEMA that you know, thought about this and this was the best choice. So this, you'll also want to include a lot of attachments. We'll kind of go over some of these in a future slide, but to help tell your story, your scope and depth of your project to the state and FEMA reviewers. So if you have engineering reports, location maps and pictures from various angles, we'll kind of go into this to show you some good examples. Okay, I'm going to turn the time over to Kat now.
Hi, so as I'm coming in and need to let you know a little bit about your NFIP requirements for BRIC, and some of them are requirements that for any project. We just wanted to let you know that the communities that the work is happening in need to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. You need floodplain development permits if it's in a special flood hazard area, and there are letter of map changes that may come into play. And as you're doing these things, you also need to look at what other permits are required, including looking at things like ESA, Endangered Species Act, and such things. So all mitigation projects must show their project in relation to the special flood hazard area on a map, and add this as an attachment to your application. So it doesn't matter whether you're in or out of the floodplain or the special flood hazard area. You need to make sure that you're including this to show that you're not in that special flood hazard area if you're not in it. Another special flood hazard area requirement is if mitigation project is located in that special flood hazard area, it has to make sure that the project must be in a jurisdiction participating, like we said, in the NFIP, and that that jurisdiction is not on probation or suspended. Currently, we do not have any communities that are on probation or suspended from the NFIP right now. There are violations going in the state that, if not remedied, could lead to one of those items, but we currently do not have any of those. The property owner must obtain and maintain flood insurance for the life of the structure, if it is a structure that is built, regardless of transfer of ownership. So that's another piece that has to be there, and there must be a deed restriction in perpetuity, letting it know that these things are going to happen and how it's to be maintained. So something that I want to address too, because a lot of times people think they don't need a floodplain development permit for certain types of projects, and certain entities do not need those floodplain development permits. But any development in that special flood hazard area requires a floodplain development permit from the local community. This includes the community itself needs to give itself a permit if it's doing something in the special flood hazard area. If it's a state agency, they need to go to the community and get one of those as well. If it is a federal agency, it's doing work there. They also need to do that. Even special districts like the school district or stormwater management districts need to go and get a special flood hazard permit. If they are working in a special flood hazard area, they need to get that floodplain development permit. Now, just so you're looking at what development means, it doesn't mean just doing a building. Yes, that is one of those things, a building or a structure. It could be a culvert. It could be mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, any storage of equipment or materials in a special flood hazard area also need to be permitted as well. A lot of people forget about that. So when you're looking at these projects and if you are going to be doing a water course alteration or changing something within that special flood hazard area, you need to look at, is it going to require a conditional letter of map revision, or CLOMR as we refer to it as. And that is something that you apply through FEMA to get. And it needs to be done before the development occurs. You can't start doing any of the development if it's one of the requirements of that development until you have it. In an area that the BFEs, but there are BFEs, which are base flood elevations, but no floodway designation, any development that would result in more than 1 foot of increase to the base flood elevation would require a conditional letter of map revision. So those are those A zones that don't have base flood elevations and don't have floodways. A development that is totally or partially within the floodway that would result in a greater than 0.0 foot increase or rise in the base flood elevation, then it would be required to get a letter of map revision. And if a community wishes to have a FEMA review for the floodway analysis, if that's part of their processes that they have done in their city and part of their policies and procedures, then you may be required to get one as well. It does not revise the flood insurance rate maps, just so you specifically know that. It always has to be followed up with a letter of map revision. If you get that conditional letter of map revision and you've gone and finished your project, I've seen it happen time and time again where individuals will think, okay, I've done what I need to do. I don't need to do anything else as far as this goes. Nope, you have to go within 6 months of the project being done and follow through with a letter of map revision. And also for letter of map revisions, they may come into play post-development with existing conditions. Changes in the base flood elevation and or floodway requires to be submitted within 6 months of project completion. When development is based on a CLOMR, then it needs to be, a LOMR needs to be done, as we've already said. And if you are having a subdivision proposal or a project that is 5 acres or 50 lots, then or greater on that, then you do have to do a letter of map revision within 6 months of doing that project. And this is when the maps are formally revised, or the firms as they like to refer to it. So you need to make sure when you're looking at a project, does it need these? Many projects might need a conditional letter of map revision or a letter of map revision, and you need to put that into your processes for your plans for these BRIC things.
Okay, we're coming back to me. Just a quick overview as you're writing your budget for the project. There's some specific requirements about what percentage of the project can fall under certain categories. It's also important to note that FEMA doesn't allow contingency costs, which means they don't allow you and don't accept a labeling of a certain contingency percentage in the budget. You can, however, factor those things into the categories that you're putting into your budget as you're developing that budget for construction or for engineering. Absorb that contingency. Oh, I'm not quite sure what just happened here. I did not touch my screen. Oh, this is what happens. Our state email account likes to randomly sign me out. Sign back in. Sorry about that. Quick bathroom break. Okay. Find where we were. We were somewhere in here. Budget. There we go. So just absorb those costs into your subline in your budget. So as you do your total for construction or engineering, just has those be part of that overall cost. Engineering costs are allowed up to 12% of the budget. If your engineering is more than 12% of the overall cost of the project, then FEMA will, I mean, it's not a direct no, but they're going to want to know some more information. You're going to have to justify why your engineering is such a high portion of the project cost. Pre-award costs, as we said before, it can be done. Oh, I don't think this was updated from last year. Work done between the grant application, open date, and date award. That's the way it used to be. My apologies for not getting that line updated for this year's presentation. It is now, as I mentioned before, there's no deadline or no back date to when the pre-award costs happened. You could have done them 9 months before the application period, a month before, or last year, but they do have to be specifically related to this grant. And that would include doing your BCA, engineering, environmental studies, etc. So anything you're going to have to do before the grant is officially awarded to you. So as you're thinking about your budget, if you're going to have to do some engineering, to develop the grant, to turn in the application, that engineering can fall under the pre-award costs. Your BCAs in the past, FEMA did not reimburse BCAs, but they do now reimburse BCAs under pre-award costs. So you will put your BCA under that pre-award cost category. And then any environmental studies. So if you're doing a project that's going to happen, as we said, in the floodplain or in some areas that might have endangered species that you're going to have to do surveys for, make sure you think about and include those costs in your pre-award, because FEMA will ask you to do those sometimes before you actually are officially awarded the grant. So you'll be approved for selection. They'll reach back to you and say, hey, we're going to award this, but you're going to have to do this study first. Your administration and management costs. So there's two categories of management. There's grant management, which is basically all the work that you're going to do related to handling the grant. And I think I got this right, Eric. Grant management's now 100% reimbursed. Eric's going to go over that a little bit more because it used to be just 75%, but now it's going to play interesting into your budget entries. But those are things you're doing specifically to manage the grant award. There's also project management. A lot of times people don't delineate project management as separate from the other things like your construction or other line items that can be absorbed into your construction line. But if you want to, or as you're thinking about how much time it's going to take you to manage the project itself, so not the FEMA grant, but just the project, that can be delineated for up to 10%. But you do also have the option to just keep that absorbed into the other categories. If you want grant management reimbursement, then you're going to want to have delineate that out and say, we're going to request grant management reimbursement. And when you're creating your budget, keep it simple. Definitely simplify. When we go to reimburse your grant, when you turn in your paperwork for us to reimburse things, we can only reimburse up to the amount that you've delineated in that line item. And so if you give us a very detailed breakdown in the application, obviously we want the backup documentation showing how you came up with that budget. But if you have 35 line items and they're very specific about, we're going to spend this much on, these types of construction materials and this much on this, it really makes it difficult for us to reimburse move funding around. So if you do broader categories and you just simply put all of your construction costs under construction, all of your engineering under engineering, pre-award and grant management, then we can have flexibility within those line items to reimburse all of your construction costs under that one line item. If at the end of the project it comes back and your engineering only ended up costing half as much as you thought, but you spent more on construction, we can then do a budget realignment request with FEMA and say how much the actual costs were, and we can realign those budgets and then reimburse you accordingly. You are required to have at least 2 line items. So oftentimes plans will only have 2 breakdowns, but you do have to have at least 2. And we say like an ideal budget, to keep it simple, is between 2 to 5 line items. I'll show you a little bit of an example here. So this is a budget. Apologies for it being blurry. It was a screenshot that didn't show up very well. But this was a budget we received that had, 15 plus line items. They submitted the budget in what was e-grants, and we reviewed it after they sent it to us, before we sent it up to FEMA, and said, hey, here's our recommendations for simplifying your budget. Take all of these smaller items and lump them under a larger category. So the ones that were crossed out were the more individual breakdown of the costs that they put into the system. And then the blue lines are the ones that they ended up actually having as line items. So they ended up with their project management and grant management. They did decide to break out project management, their pre-award costs, and then they were doing a river restoration project. So they didn't have just construction, but they decided to break it out between construction and then their plantings. So they did the construction of dredging out the river, realigning it, and then they had a budget for replanting trees and other species to help stabilize the riverbank. And so much simpler. FEMA will still want you to supply and have available the detailed breakdown. So have that as an attachment, but you don't want to enter every single line item into the application itself. Because as I said, the application line items are what we use to do the reimbursements later. And pre-award costs. So these are the costs that are directly related to developing the grant application. So as I mentioned before, your BCA, your environmental data, you have to have a pre-award cost line item in your budget in order for those costs to be reimbursed. Unfortunately, they're now doing BCAs and others in the pre-award. Unfortunately, if you don't receive the grant award, you won't be reimbursed for those pre-award costs. That's only if you get the grant selected and awarded. And also, you can't begin to do the implementation of the project until the grant is officially awarded. So even if you're selected for further review and FEMA requests more information, you may be able to do studies, but you can't actually break ground and begin the project until you officially receive the award. Management costs. I'm going to let this go over to Eric. He can jump in a little bit about management costs that are eligible.
Okay, yeah, so management costs. So as Jenna mentioned earlier, the new thing for BRIC is that management costs are now eligible for up to 5% of your total grant, and it's 100% federal share paid for. So indirect costs are eligible, direct administrative costs, and any other admin expenses relating to administering a grant. So you can read some of those eligible cost activities: development, sub-application development, managing the quarterly reports, the closeouts, site visits, staff salary costs directly related to the grant. So if you are wanting to claim indirect costs, just be aware that you are required to submit an indirect cost rate agreement that your jurisdiction has. And be aware that if you do claim management costs, there will be a lot more documentation. You will also, when you do reimbursement, you're going to have to show, like if you do staff, you're going to have to show timesheets, things like that, to show the document that you were able to meet the requirements for management costs.
Oh. We thought it was back to me. I'm gonna let Eric speak a little.
I have one more thing. So this is something you're going to see in the application in FEMA Go in the budget. It sort of was not done very well, so FEMA gave a little shortcut on how to resolve this. So as you know, you're going to put in your budget, and if you do request management costs, it's 5%, but that's 100% paid for. So it's a little bit tricky on your budget. So here's a little trick, and this will also be on the document we send out. What you're going to do in FEMA Go is you're going to add your normal budget first without management costs. And then you'll see this screen here that shows the 75-25 percentage. That does it automatically. Now, if you wanted to do a greater non-federal share, let's say you wanted to pay 50-50 or something like that, then you would add your non-federal share to be a higher number. But whatever it is, if you kept the 75-25, copy or write down the dollar amount right there. So in this example, it's $25 out of a total of 100, which is 25. Then you're going to go back and you're going to add a new line item for management costs. You're going to do that go through that process in FEMA Go, and then it'll automatically update the percentage here, and it will be wrong because it automatically did 75-25. What you're going to do is take your old non-federal share number from your original budget, so in this case $25, and you're going to paste it right here. Paste it in there, and then it will automatically update to the correct percentage. So this is the workaround that FEMA came up with, a simple way. If not, you're going to have to come up with the math yourself and figure it out. So this is just a simple way to do the management cost.
Okay, well, I'm sorry for all the screen jumping, guys, switching back and forth between people. We have a little jumping around. So we say simple way, but we know it's confusing. So don't worry about remembering all of this now. We will put this little workaround in what we call our cheat sheet that we will be sending out to everyone that will help walk you through the application process in FEMA Go and give you all the tips and tricks you need to make sure you're entering the right information into the right places. All right, so the cost share, as Eric mentioned, the standard cost share is 75-25. So whatever your project you submit, FEMA will reimburse up to 75% of that, and then you are responsible for the remaining 25. Your 25% can be in cash. So if you're just doing a project and you're hiring a contractor to do the engineering and a contractor to do the construction, you pay them up front, and then we'll reimburse you 75% of that. Or you can do your 25% for things such as cash, donated resources, any in-kind services, materials, or combination of the above. You cannot apply other federal funds towards the BRIC federal non-cost federal share. That has to be non-federally associated money. So it has to be local dollars or state dollars or some other source of funding. As mentioned before, there also is the option of partnering with some private or nonprofits to have them help with the match as well. So if you're partnering with a developer or with a local nonprofit and you're doing a joint project, some of their contributions, as long as their contributions are not federal funding, could also be applied towards the local share. There is the option to do a federal share of 90% federal and 10% local, but that is only for small impoverished communities. And as mentioned in the update, the corner, that 5% of management costs will be reimbursed at 100% instead of the 75%. So people always ask us about what is a small impoverished community. We've done some looking around Utah. We had a few that were interested last year and kind of did a deep dive into it. There are kind of 3 components, and you must meet all of these and submit proof of documentation that these requirements are met. It has to be a community that's 3,000 or fewer individuals. The local unemployment rate must exceed by 1 full percentage point or more the average yearly national unemployment rate. And the average per capita annual income cannot exceed 80% of the national per capita income. If you think you meet those requirements, let us know. We know what websites you can go to pull up the documentation, to do a review, and to make that. But you have to not just say you're a small impoverished community, but you have to provide the documentation and justification to show that you do meet those requirements when you turn in your application. Procurement, this could be a whole course on its own, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but all of your procurement activities must be conducted in accordance with federal procurement standards. So that's in what's called 2 CFR. Those are the things there. I put a link here that takes you to an online version of the CFR. So if you want to actually read the federal regulations directly, you can go there and look at that. FEMA's guidance on procurement is based off of that federal regulation. So the federal regulation is the rule and the law. FEMA only provides guidance on how to best implement those regulations into their grant programs. So their guidance is beholden to what's in the actual federal regulation. So there is a FEMA brochure that's a short 2-pager. They don't really produce and hand this out anymore, but it is still available. It's something that was made for doing procurement under disaster circumstances, but it does provide a nice brief overview on things that you should look for. So you can use this as an initial kind of look and review of what are the federal procurement requirements. And then you can go to, FEMA has a procurement resource website where they've taken what was in this brochure and now they provide a lot more information. Oops, I clicked on the wrong one again. Let me get the right one here. Oh. No, sorry, I'll fix that link. Apparently I put the same link in both sections. But they do have a procurement resource website that has several documents that go into detail for some of these items, such as what are some of the frequent sources of non-compliance issues, the type of contracts, what you need to do to document and show that you've met the federal procurement requirements. And just so you're aware, the state of Utah does not have the same requirements that federal government does for procurement. The state of Utah procurement requirements are much less stringent. And so in your normal procurement activities, you might be meeting state guidelines and you might be meeting your local guidelines. But when you're receiving federal grant money, you are required to follow the federal procurement standards. You have to follow whatever is the most strict. And when it comes to using these grants in Utah, it is the federal requirements. One of those big things are, some of them are like the small women and minority-owned businesses. There's a lot of tips in there on how to do that. I do just want to note that the procurement is it's managed for all federal grants for all federal programs. So these requirements are not FEMA requirements. They are Federal Office of Management and Budget requirements for anyone working with federal funding. So while FEMA and DEM can give you guidance and some best practices and kind of refer you to the resources and the reading material on how you can meet those requirements, we can't review and verify or guarantee that your procurement policies and practices will meet the federal auditing requirements. It's not, we just don't have the liability or the ability to do that. We can just provide, as I said, provide some guidance, but you're going to have to read the rules, know what the standards are, and then do your best to document and follow those within that. It's the Office of Management and Budget at the federal level. They're the ones that set these standards and they're the ones that put the requirements in and will do the auditing. And so we'll do our best to help you, but we cannot review or guarantee that what you're doing will not, be immune to auditing. And then some of the frequent non-compliance issues. So it's contracts are a big one. Awarding to solicitation drafters, piggybacking cost plus percentage of cost contracts, or suspended or debarred contractors. Those are some of the things that are outlined, as I said, in these resources. One thing I did want to bring up is we often get people that are concerned because in the FEMA guidance, it says that you can't, if someone helps you develop your application, that person can then not bid on the project or bid for the work. And there was a lot of confusion when that rule first came out. People thought, oh no, if I have an engineer who's helping me fill out the project, does that mean they can't work on the grant? And we just want to clarify, no, the actual law is that the guidance is based off is that to eliminate unfair competitive advantage, anyone who's helping you write any sort of competitive application or writing the standards that someone who's going to be bidding on a project, they cannot compete for that project. Generally, if you've already procured this person as your engineer and they're helping you with the application and also with the project, that's fine. You've done the right, fair, competitive process. You've brought them on as doing both of those. It would just be a situation where if you're hiring a contractor, if you're going to put a contract out for bid, if you're going to put the construction project out for bid, you can't have someone who would be competing for that bid help you with the application. So your engineers who have already been pre-contracted, who've already gone through that process, who are already, hired on to do the application and the project are fine. It's just anything that you're going to open up for a competitive bid after you receive the grant. anyone who's going to bid on that cannot help you with the application, because that would give them an unfair advantage or might put in some, you know, under the table negotiations for them being chosen to win that open bid project. And the schedule. So this is what the schedule kind of looks like in there. They're going to ask you to put a task name, a description, the start month, and duration in months. So this is, in the past, they haven't asked you to put dates in. We know that it's never guaranteed when FEMA is going to award the project, so it's very hard to say exactly when you're going to be able to start. So just keep the timeline in mind that it's not likely to be awarded until next winter. You'll want to put your start date or start month for the task. If you can only do construction in the summer, you know, you're going to put that in there. And then when you do a description or you put any notes in, just note that we can only do construction between these months of the year. So depending on when FEMA awards it, that's what it will go into. I think the most important thing is the duration of the task is where it will come out. That will help FEMA know if you can complete the project within the timeline allowed. You can do up to 36 months. We recommend that you overestimate how much time it's going to take you. While it seems like it's good to say, oh, we'll have this done in 6 months, because there's always delays, because it takes a while for FEMA to get things out, it's better to overestimate and get it done faster than to underestimate and need to do extensions. And so just pad some extra time in there, give yourself some extra time to get all of your tasks done, and take up as much of that 36 months as you can within your schedule, because then it won't require us to do any extensions or explanations of why things weren't completed on time later. All right, benefit cost analysis. I'm going to turn this over to Eric.
I'm just going to hit this really quick because we have a presentation that goes into detail more about this. Just be aware in the application, there will be a section for the benefit cost analysis in the cost effectiveness section. It's required for a project, not plan or project scoping, and you're going to be using FEMA's BCA 6.0 version or newer. Just remember that I highlighted in red, documentation, document. If you don't have documentation, it will not pass. And the BCR, the benefit cost ratio, is 1.0. And I just want to hit this. In the past, the Division of Emergency Management used to reimburse sub-applicants for their BCA analysis. That is no longer the case now, being that BCA costs are now eligible as a pre-award cost item. However, that is only if you get awarded. So if you do the BCA and you do not get awarded, you are responsible for the BCA cost. In addition, DEM has hired BCA experts to help you with your BCA questions that go beyond the FEMA's basic BCA helpline. And we will turn the time over to them and just right after this shortly. Okay, so some of the required forms, you'll see these in FEMA Go. You'll be required to fill these out. They should be uploaded in there, and you can see that some refer to non-construction or construction. If you see this box down here, if you clicked on yes or no, it would then hopefully populate the right ones in FEMA Go for you. And the federal assistance one, we have some help for some common questions that people don't know the answer to in the guide that we will send out. Some of the supporting documentation attachments you want, you can see if you have a mitigation plan. And for project scoping project, everyone needs a match letter. So what this is a letter from your jurisdiction that says, yes, we can meet the non-federal share. If that's 25% or more, you need a signed letter that says, the money, this amount of money is available on this date. If it's, you know, January 1st, or, you know, just if it's a general date, you need, you know, like October 1st of 2021 or something, this, and that we agree to pay the non-federal share. For mitigation plans, this is very important. If you're doing a mitigation plan right now that is a multi-jurisdictional one, you will need participation letters. Right now, you need to go and start getting those participation letters from the county and cities. If you're a multi one, right? So get a letter from each city, sign and say, hey, we agreed to participate in this. They can be short, but get those now so you can upload those. Those can take a while. So everyone is going to need to submit a budget narrative. it says budget letter there. Should be budget narrative. This is where you're going to explain your budget more in detail. So you have your line items, then you're going to need to show the state and FEMA how you came up with your estimate. So if you say you're going to, do this much in staff time, we want to know, okay, how many staff at what, at what hourly rate, or, just break down a little bit more on your narrative and give a narrative on what each line item means in your budget, how you came up with it. Very important for projects and things is location maps. Tell your story, tell FEMA, they're not familiar with this area. Show, where your area is. If you have engineering reports and studies, you're going to need to include photos if you can for projects. All your BCA stuff, as we talked about, that floodplain map, things like that. If you are doing an acquisition project, please contact us. There is a lot of more documentation that you will need to submit. There's a lot to it. And the voluntary participation forms from potential landowners, you need to hold a town hall, things like that. Please let us know. So here's an example of some good photos. As you can see, take them from multiple angles. Having a satellite view really helps. This helps paint your picture rather than just one photo. Then you can upload those. And finally, you'll get to an evaluation section. So this will, ask a few questions. And one of the common ones is this community rating system, CRS community. These right here are all the CRS communities in the state of Utah. So if you're one of those, you can make a note of the ranking 9, 8, 7, or 10. The cooperating technical partner, CTP, click no. And this will be on the cheat sheet as well. There's only one in Utah. And then now we will turn to Ember.
Okay, everyone, you're on the home stretch. We're just going to briefly go over the environmental and historic preservation requirements. Then we're going to do the criteria to score your grants. And then we'll have a brief BCA training and take your questions. So the environmental and historic preservation review only applies to projects, not plans. And it is your responsibility as a sub-applicant to conduct all EHP studies, and then FEMA reviews those. The information FEMA requires is outlined in the FEMA Go application, but if you're unsure about what studies you need to conduct, FEMA Region 8 has a dedicated EHP team, and the state will facilitate your coordination with that team to ensure that you're conducting the correct studies for your project. Now, once you've determined the appropriate studies, it'll be your responsibility to consult with federal, state, and regional agencies and ensure that the studies are done in a timely manner. And we'll provide you with an EHP checklist. Here's an example of that checklist. And you just go down the list and answer yes to any questions that apply to your project, and that will help you determine what studies you need to do for your project to be in EHP compliance. And then you need to coordinate with the appropriate agencies and keep copies of all correspondence so you can provide verification to FEMA that you've gone through a thorough EHP review. Okay, and then finally, when you're completing your application, you'll be asked what alternatives you've considered besides the project that you'd like to do. So one of the options you must talk about is what the implications are if you take no action to mitigate the hazard. In your application, make sure you discuss how you mitigate any adverse effects on the environment that have been identified in your preliminary EHP studies. And finally, make sure that the cost of your EHP reviews and efforts to mitigate effects on the environment are included in your project budget that you submit to FEMA with your application. And sometimes these agencies take a long time, weeks or months, to do the EHP reviews, so start early to ensure that your project isn't delayed. Okay, now the review process. There's going to be a state review, then FEMA will review based on a technical evaluation and a qualitative evaluation. And your project's cumulative score from these two evaluations will determine whether or not it's reviewed with the other projects across the nation. Utah is only guaranteed to move one project forward to the national review, so we want your projects to be as competitive as possible so that more than one gets into that national review. Your projects are due to the state of Utah by Tuesday, December 1st. In the past, we've been flexible with this deadline, but with over 100 interested applicants this year, it's going to be a hard and fast deadline. We set this timeline for you guys to benefit you, so we have time to review your projects and help you troubleshoot any obvious deficiencies or shortfalls in your applications that will make them ineligible when FEMA reviews them. The number one reason Utah applications weren't approved in the past was because of problems with the benefit cost analysis. So the state has hired contractors with over 50 years of combined experience doing BCAs to review your project and help you fix any problems before we forward them on to FEMA. They will only have time to do this if you get your projects to us by December 1st or earlier, so please take the deadline seriously. Our priorities for 2020, we have $600,000 set aside, guaranteed to the state, and out of that money, we're required to fund any mitigation plans and do project scoping grants. So based on the NOIs we've received, we've identified $275,000 in planning grants so far. So if any of you are doing a project scoping grant, just be aware that your project must be $325,000 or less. Okay, the first FEMA review, the state will submit your applications to FEMA by January 29th, 2021. That's the BRIC deadline. And then FEMA will review the projects to make sure that the project you're proposing is eligible and the application is complete. So make sure you're completing every required section of the application. If you have questions, ask us here at the state. Don't leave anything blank or guess. That's what we're here. We're here to help you. These applications are a lot of work and you don't want to be eliminated because of a minor clerical error. Then FEMA is going to do a technical evaluation. They will only send projects onto the third qualitative review up to 2 times the amount of available funding. So the technical evaluation is really important. There's 100 points available under 8 criteria, and you'll either receive full points because you meet all the criteria, or you'll get no points. So be aware too that it's impossible to get 100 points. Here's the criteria. And I'm just going to go over a couple that were new to me. So this last one on the top column, the applicant has mandatory building code adoption requirements. Utah, as a state, has adopted those building codes. So this applies statewide. So in case you weren't sure about that, now you know. Another one that was unfamiliar to me was the nature-based solutions. This is a project that has sustainable environmental management practices to restore or enhance natural systems like the restoration of grasslands, or rivers, or floodplains, or wetlands, soil stabilization, or aquifer storage and recovery projects. So those are the type of projects that will qualify as a nature-based solution. And there's lots of resources available if you need more on that from FEMA. The other one I wasn't as familiar with is the Building Code Effectiveness Grading Schedule. And this is an independent assessment of a community's building codes and their enforcement of building code activities. And it's on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being the best, 10 being the worst. And FEMA, if you have this independent review, and you score between 1 and 5, then you qualify to get those 15 extra points. And so you need to submit your ISO scorecard to get the points, showing that you were on that range. Another common one is infrastructure projects, which a lot of you will be doing. You just need to talk about how your infrastructure in the scope of work, how this project will reduce the natural hazard risk to a critical structure or system that is essential to your community. The examples here are like a food bank building or a wastewater treatment plant. And then new this year is the lifelines. So to meet the lifeline criteria, you need to show how your project will mitigate risk to at least one of the 7 community lifelines to enable critical function essential to human health and safety or economic security to continue after an event. These lifelines are safety and security, food, water, shelter, health and medical, energy, communications, transportation, and hazardous materials. And there are multiple resources on this slide and on an earlier slide where Eric talked about this to help you better understand how to meet this criteria. And finally, After you pass the technical evaluation, FEMA will conduct a qualitative evaluation. This is also 100 points, and there will be a national panel that scores these projects based on 6 criteria. Here's the 6 criteria, and I'm just going to go over the ones that aren't obvious. One that's worth 15 points is called future conditions. That is taking a look at your future population growth, your demographic models, or climate changes that you're anticipating. If you can show how your project's going to mitigate one of those future conditions, you can qualify for those 15 additional points. And then leveraging partners. FEMA wants us to think outside the box. Instead of paying for things ourselves as a community, they want us to partner with as many other shareholders as possible. And they want to know how they'll contribute, either financially or with support or promoting the proposed project. Partners can also be involved in the design. And you can partner with universities or private organizations. You can also partner with surrounding jurisdictions. So sometimes natural hazards cross city lines. And so if you can show that you're partnering with additional cities or another county, then that will help you leverage that partner. 15 points. And then finally, to get the highest score possible, your application needs to include a narrative where you explain the strengths of your proposed project by detailing how the project will effectively reduce risk and increase resilience, how projects are innovative and will benefit your community, including how you arrived at your BCA. And BCAs are what we're going to talk about next.
Okay, so we're going to turn the time over to one of, as we mentioned, the state of Utah has, I want to clarify at this point, we've contracted some BCA specialists to help us advise you on your BCAs as you develop them. That's not to say we've hired them to be contractors to do your BCAs for you. You will need to have your own contractors to develop your BCAs. And then if those contractors or your staff member or whoever is developing the BCA runs into some issues, wants some clarification, or just needs some guidance in how to do that, then you can reach out to the FEMA helpline. And if it's something that's beyond what they can help you with, then contact us at DEM and we will put you in contact with one of our BCA specialists that can help provide some more insight and advisement on your BCA development. They're also going to help us, once you submit your project, they're also going to help us review them. So if you have issues throughout your project in developing the BCA, please let us know so we can get you the best advice. And then they're going to help us review and rank the BCAs and get back to you with our requests for information and changes that you need to make to your application. One other thing I wanted to clarify, which should have been in the eligible activities that Amber reminded me of when she said future conditions, is that score is for future conditions, not for future development. So another category that's not eligible under these programs is to do mitigation for future development. And so that's more like you can't build a debris basin to protect an empty field that might be developed in the future. You can do a debris basin to protect existing structures, but obviously if you need to upgrade your infrastructure systems to deal with future drought or to deal with other those things, those are what's meant by future conditions, as opposed to trying to do a project for future development or growth. So I will now turn it over to our IEM partners to discuss BRIC BCA with you.
I'm Danny Kwan, and with Michael Dodson, we have about 65 years of doing benefit costs to FEMA style, and we'd like to thank the Utah DEM for inviting us to join with their development of grant projects. So hang on to your hat. So let's talk about what is a benefit cost. We had to give a little caveat to this. Most projects that fail because they don't have a BCA attached to it, or that the BCA wasn't properly documented or properly done. So if you want a project to be funded, you've got to have a fully documented and the cost-effective BCA. Otherwise, it would not get funded. so many. I looked at thousands of projects over the years, and so many people just ignore that and just did budgeting of the project, figure out how they're going to build it, figure out the scheduling of the construction, but they failed to do the BCA and just kind of give it lip service. It's important that you spend the time on this in order to get a cost-effective project. So basically, benefit cost is very simple. It looks at the benefit of a project to society, amortized over the lifetime of that project, divided by the cost of that project, amortized over its lifetime. So if the benefit exceeds the cost, then it is considered cost factor, or if the ratio is greater than 1 to 1 or higher. So let's go on. One of the reasons that it's been alluded to by so many other people that have already spoken in the last hour and a half so, is that there's a limited amount of funding. So if you have 2 projects that's equal, otherwise, you got to figure out which one do you fund. The one that has the highest benefit cost ratio is the one that should be funded. This is considered to be the best use of federal funding and societal money. One of the now the benefit cost model that FEMA has is actually fairly easy to use. It's kind of leads you through it, and you can fill it in really quickly. It doesn't take much. There's not much of a learning curve to use it. What is difficult is trying to find the information to fill it. And benefit is the most difficult thing. You have the cost already of what you're going to do with your project, but you got to figure out what the benefit is of having this project. How many lives it's going to save, reduce injury, reduce traffic jam, reduce flooding damages, reduce wildfire destruction, etc. And you have to figure out how that's going to be amortized over the course of the future or the lifespan of that project. So the most important thing we want to emphasize is that if you can find historical data, like for example, flood claims, or your city clerk has a history of what the public works has spent time on doing, or your sheriff department or police department has spent time in trying to divert traffic, doing emergency response and next time. Those are which is wait and go. You can use those information generally in a BCA, but you have to show documentation how you got that information. So we got this from Utah DEM that these are the kind of NOIs that you got about over 100. So you got acquisition projects, drainage project, earthquake, and protective measures you could take to try to prevent wildfire damage to homes in the rural area, generate backups, and planning projects. So what kind of benefit can you claim? So let's look at a list. Well, you can try to, in terms of create damage, what kind of, oops, what happened to there? I didn't touch anything. Okay, let's try again. One, we can look at from the benefits in the BCA model, what kind of physical damage has been avoided by using this project. The less homes have been flooded, less traffic jam, less roads destruction, less fire damage. We can look at the next one in terms of what your emergency response team has to do. How by getting out into a rural area, trying to go out narrow lanes and trying to get to the fire and trying to put out the fire, finding a source of water to put out the fire. Just one example. Next one looks at loss of function. For example, you have institutions like schools, how much they impact the community. Look at your public service in terms of what City Hall does for the community. All those are considered that if you avoid them, they could be used as benefit in BCA model. The next one is very important, especially when you have things that you can't anticipate very well, like a tornado, like an earthquake. I mean, something that really, so statistically, FEMA figured out that for every death, it's around $7 million per person. I'm sorry they put a price on some person's head, but in the BCA, well, we use that. And if you have injury, we can put tens of thousands per injury. And finally, we can also allow for certain things that will give benefit. We can't use this as a sole source within the BCA, but if we can add to it, for example, if you avoid reduce the amount of flooding to homes as a result of the project, you can reduce mental stress, mental anxiety, and we put a price tag on that. And you can reduce the loss of a worker from going to work. We again have a price tag on that. So what kind of information can you put in the BCA? So we kind of show here in 5 areas. What natural hazard is the project addressing? In other words, are you looking at things like flooding, wildfires, electrical storms, what have you? What's important in doing a BCA is trying to figure out the frequency. So if there's some statistic, it's like for rain, you can look at frequency and how often it occurs. We go to water, we can determine how often you get a 100-year event or 50-year event. How long would the project be effective for? This is important. You've got to figure out whether or not the structure you're putting in is major enough to last 25, 30, 50 years. And the longer the lifetime of the project, the higher the BCA ratio is going to come up. What damage does it hazard cause to the community? In other words, what can you reduce in terms of not just the individual home, but in the community as a whole? And how much damage does this project prevent, actually? In other words, is it just preventing a home from being flooded, a house being flooded, or what have you? So if you can address all these things, then you can have benefits you can put in a BCA, and then you can get good cost-effective BCA. Now, FEMA requires something that, and also the Office of Management Budgets with their regulation that the project has to be cost effective if it exceeds 1-to-1. And we can use social benefit if we have at least a 0.75-to-1 ratio or higher. We can add that so we can get it over to 1. We can't use social benefit as the sole basis for doing the BCA, but we can use it as a additive factor that can help you get over that hump. So the social benefit, again, hey, I didn't hit that. Mental stress and anxiety and loss of productivity. Come on. Okay, let's look at an example of a hazard mitigation plan. And the most common one, which 8 out of 10 projects in Utah are flooding. Let's look at, we have a typical house here. The first FFE means first floor elevation. The house is at 4,500 feet. The 5-year event of flood, it would be at the same elevation, 4,500 feet. A 10-year flood frequency would be at 4502 or 2 feet higher, and 100-year it would be at 4 feet higher. Let's look at some of the losses that you can expect. This is comes out of a BCA. We know what the frequencies are. We can figure out what the damages are. We use things like depth damage function, which is if you have 1 foot of water, you get so much damage. You get 2 foot, you get so much damage. Then you look at the building replacement value. Next time, we can calculate what the expected losses are. And for this house, it'd be the annual loss would be about $12,000 over a course of lifetime. What happens if we elevate this house? Say that we elevated 3 feet. The new first floor elevation would be 4,503 feet. It'd be above the 10-year, it'd be above the 5 years, but it'd be still below the 100-year. Okay? If you do the calculation, the annual damage is substantially reduced to $64. Okay? If you take this amortize out over the lifespan of the project and using a 7% discount rate, which is set by the Office Management Budget, which we already discussed already, we can get a benefit cost ratio of 1.41 to 1. This means this project, if it's well documented and what have you, should be able to get funded. Let's look at some of the things that you need to get to do a BCA. For example, the most common one you have is a flood project. And you usually do either an acquisition of that project or you do an elevation. Flood maps, like we discussed earlier a few minutes ago. Floodplains, if there are about 960,000 homes in Utah, only 4,000 people have flood insurance. So that's not likely, but if in case they do, you can use the floodplain in a BCA. If the homeowner did their own repairs, you can have their documentation and use as for the BCA. The floodplain manager could have determined that this is substantial damage, and this can be important information to be used in a BCA. Elevation certificate, if it's available, are very important because if you do a elevation or a acquisition, you usually use a flood insurance study, look at where the elevation of the flood and the amount of flow that's in the river, and plug it into the model. The model would then take into account where the first floor is located in terms of trying to figure out how much damage at those frequency. Building replacement value is very important. If you have a real estate appraisal, those can be used. Or if you use in the industry gold standard like RS-Mean, you can use their estimator in terms of trying to figure out what the value of the house is. Just saying that this house is worth about $100,000 and let go of that, it's not going to fly. You've got to document it. Otherwise, it would be rejected. Lastly, you need to show what the cost of this project is going to be. In terms of, typical elevation is anywhere from 30,000 to 60,000. Acquisition is depending on what the value of the home is, and what have you. Okay. You also may need to have a map of the impact watershed. If there's, local institutions like universities and big engineering firms may have done already a hydraulic and hydrology study. So those can be handy. They could be used in a BCA model. One thing you can use if you do a drainage type project is do what we call loss avoidance calculation spreadsheet. This is a systematic way of inventorying all the houses, what the addresses, the lot and launch, what's the square footage of the house, what the building replacement value is, and then you try to see how much flooding has occurred for the different frequency, and this is where you can easily summarize it. FEMA recognizes this, and you can use this to put it into a BCA, and this is a great form of documentation. We can show you how to do this. Or you can look at a historical claim from the floodplain if there's available for all the individual homes. What happens if you have an earthquake? If you have, again, insurance claim or home repair, you try to also look in terms of, because this is what kind of BCA you're going to run, you have to figure out what type of anti-earthquake measure you can take. Are you going to retrofit the building? Are you going to reinforce the building? Are you going to reinforce the road piers of a highway that could collapse? Are you going to reinforce a cinder block home with rebar and concrete fill? Are you going to reinforce crippled walls with plywood or fiberglass or other materials like that? Are you going to platform frame, which is a way to strengthen? So these are all the things that you have to consider of what you're going to do in an earthquake project, and then you also need what the cost is. And the BCA is able to take these into account and give you an output whether or not it can be fundable. A structural engineer report and recommendation may be very important if that's available. Wildfires. Well, one of the things you can do is try to get a list of the buildings that needs wildfire mitigation in terms of how to protect them from, do you need defensible space? If you have 130 feet between the house and where the nearest woods are in some place, this would reduce the ability from the intense heat from causing things inside the house to ignite by radiation. Class A roofing will keep a fine ember from causing the house to catch on fire. You can actually reduce the amount of fire potential by reducing the combustible material like trees and wood and debris and junk around the house. You can put vents, grids in the vents around the house so you keep fine air from going inside the house. You have maintenance plans to keep this thing going, and you can also have fireproof sheeting or coatings you put on. You can have intermittent paint that will expand 30 times the thickness, that will go against 2,000 degrees for up to 3 hours. If this coating was put on the Twin Towers in New York City, those Twin Towers would not have come down. You can rebuild with fireproof lumber and what have you. Let me just get going because I'm running out of time. Come on. For the roads, we can also look at things that you can do to try to protect geomatting, gambian rocks, and extra groundwater. You can also look at projects like, if I can get this and go on the next one, come on. Generators. Well, we don't need, you need to show the reason why you need a generator, not just for the loss of the generator. What is the thing that you're trying to solve? A loss of power to a pump station, to an emergency facility, hospital, and what have you? What's the cost of the generator? What's the fuel source? A number of people that's impacted by the loss of the power and things like that, those would be very important in a BC. Okay, planning doesn't require BCA, but it's important that you try to look at a hazard mitigation place for any FEMA funding. It must address all the mitigation need of the local cities, especially in the future. And you must list a proposal that can be funded reasonably. Okay, I'll turn this over back to our host.
Okay, well, I'm waiting for it to transition back over to us so you can see our contact information again.
I dosed this all right.
That's okay. If Kat or someone can do it, that's great. If not, I'll just speak with your your slide showing. So just a few comments now that we're here at the end. Thank you everyone for sticking it out for the last 2 hours. We're going to stay online to answer questions and have some conversations. So if you would like to be a part of that, please, stay on. We're going to stay on for a while. We won't end at the 2 hours. But I want to thank Denny for taking over that BCA presentation. IEM are the person that is, the specialists that are helping us. They have a dynamic team, and we're going to co-present. And unfortunately, others were pulled away at the last minute, so Denny stepped in and took over that whole BCA presentation. That was meant to just give you guys a brief overview of what's required for a BCA. We often have a lot of applicants who try to do the BCA themselves, but don't have any experience. And while the software is fairly easy to use and to plug things in, there is a lot that has to go into the values that you put in, where you get the information from, how much weight you give to all those values. So we are going to offer a kind of a more in-depth info session on the BCA itself for those who would like to learn more. It's recommended that you have the people that will be doing your BCA attend, and those of you that will be needing to provide that data to the person doing the BCA. We're hoping to have that next week, but we also realize a lot of you might not have the person lined up to do your BCA yet. So we'll have some back and forth with you. If you can put in the chat now, send us an email, just maybe let us know if next week's too soon. We could do it with the week or two after, but we do want to have that info session soon so that you have enough time to work on the BCA. And that will just go over some of the, the documentation that you'll need, different formulas that are in there, and just like common pitfalls and mistakes to avoid when doing the BCA. And with that, I guess we'll move on to questions. I guess I thought there was one more thing I wanted to clarify, but it left my head. So if I think of it, I'll bring it up as we're doing the Q&A. But just thank you all for attending. I know this was a lot of information. FEMA's been releasing this guidance as the application period has been opening. So it's stuff that we're learning just now, and we'll keep updating you on as the process goes along. We don't want to discourage you from applying for projects. We definitely want to get as many quality projects in as we can. And if you think you can get, if you have a project that's partially developed and you want to get it in this year, we're going to help you do that. We're also happy to help support you if you want to take another year and apply next year once, things are more solidified and you have some more time to do that. So definitely don't just, drop off, call us, email us, ask us questions, and we'll do the best we can to help you develop a project. Another thing that was brought up is that because there's no time period associated with those pre-award costs, if you're not going to, like if you apply this year and you are not selected, and so then you're not reimbursed for your BCA costs, you can decide to try again next year with that same project, and you could be reimbursed for those costs then. So you'll only get reimbursed if you're awarded, but you can always reapply. So that is an option as well. So, all right, so I will go through some of the questions.
Jana, there is a question that says, can you clarify new construction as being ineligible? Does that only pertain to buildings, or does it include other types of infrastructure for utility systems? Thanks. So
with the utility systems, it's a little bit more blurry, but in general, it's new construction for those as well. Like we said before, it's expected that if you're, as I mentioned also with, trying to build a debris basin for a yet developed area, FEMA kind of it's expected that as you gain knowledge, as you go forward, that you're going to have more stringent codes. You're just going to have your baseline requirements be more resilient as you build new things. And so this funding is kind of held for those things that need to be fixed, for things that, things need to be mitigated because there wasn't a good standard there before. So in general, I would say it also applies to building of new infrastructure and utility systems, or new facilities being built. But talk to us about the project, because depending on what it is you're doing and what it's for, and if it's tied to old systems or protecting like homes or infrastructure that already exists, it could potentially be eligible. So that's something to discuss with us more. Similar with, the fire fuel breaks, like we talked about, fuel breaks themselves aren't eligible, but there are components of fuel breaks that could be eligible, such as fuel reduction and those type of things. So if you're in any doubt, just reach out to us. We'll do our research. We'll, contact our FEMA partners informally. They're really good at giving us advice and helping us know what things would or wouldn't be considered eligible. And then, oh yes, I do have a message. When we do the BCA training, we'll also record it and save it so that if people cannot attend at that time, they'll be able to watch it later as well. Do we have any other questions? Feel free to turn your mics on or type them into the chat box. So for what we've seen in our projects, if anything reaches above, depends on the flood mitigation project and whether you've put the data in correctly. A lot of times, if we see a BCA 5 or above, then FEMA really scrutinizes it. They want to make sure that you're not overclaiming the benefits, that you're not double claiming some of the the credits that are in there to count towards the BCA. Having a BCA of 1 or 2 is not necessarily bad. You can still definitely pass with a 1. The ratio doesn't have to be super high to pass. It's more the quality that was put into the BCA. So when FEMA delves into the documentation, making sure that you've put all of the correct data in, that you claimed the right amounts of things, and that you applied them correctly. So I think the highest BCAs we've had were actually with earthquake retrofit. And that's because the main benefit of that is life safety and saving lives. So if your project is something that reduces deaths and saves lives, then the BCA will tend to be higher, especially if the cost is initially low. But those were high for the retrofits because it was like a couple $1,000s per house, and you were saving several lives within a household on average. So most of our BCAs fall within the 1 to 2 range. Occasionally we get BCAs that are over that. And if they are over that, then FEMA will definitely scrutinize them a bit more and make sure the math was done correctly. Okay. I don't see any more questions pop up, or no one pops on their mic in the next few minutes. We'll end the session, but please feel free to reach out to us. All of our email information is down below. Reach out to any one of us and we'll definitely make sure to follow up with you. So, and those of you that have submitted NOIs, we'll be following up with you regardless to make sure you're still interested in applying this year or next year, or if you think your project's not eligible, you know, we can walk through that with you as well. Okay. All right, well, with that, we'll end the session. Thank you everyone for sticking out these 2 hours, and we hope you have a good day. We should have this recording up and the slides available to share, if not today, then by the beginning of next week. So thank you for coming.